So first off, we've got this very long power brick here, and this did not come, as far as I know, with the battery. That, or perhaps the people that were selling it threw it out just to avoid any possible problems. And this is a Sharp model battery charger. It's not some generic replacement. In addition to the camcorder and the charger, I did get this manual, the original operation manual, for this being a VHS camcorder. There's a little leaflet here for labeling VHS tapes, and also another sticker for labeling a VHS tape. Right and swipe. But the main star of the show is this, the Sharp VL-L270U full-sized VHS camcorder from the 1990s. This is actually a pretty well-equipped model, especially for the time that it came from, and I was surprised to find, in addition to the camcorder, of course, the genuine Sharp power charger. And I just dropped something on the ground that was stuck on here. And this is model number, I have no clue what kind of model number that is, but, well, there you go, made in Japan. And I'm pretty sure that this camcorder did come with the original battery, but either somebody stole it, which is probably why this was sitting on the test bench, or the people selling this camera decided to remove it to avoid any possible problems that could ensue with selling a used 25-year-old battery. But this is the original charger, and thankfully it's got the end which you can use, and that's what fell earlier, to plug it into the camera to supply AC line voltage to the camera, to be able to power it directly from AC without the need of a battery. Now, coming and starting at the top of the camera, we have a power control up here and eject button. Behind this door we have some controls here to control the various operations, such as fast forward, rewind, play, setting and adjusting the date and time, the tracking, as well as some dubbing abilities, because this apparently can record to VHS tape, hence the addition of the record button, audio dub, the insert button. So this can do, I believe, crude video and audio dubbing, rudimentary editing, linear editing, of course, right in the camcorder. You have some controls up here for auto and manual focus modes. You have backlight compensation / gain up, which just brightens up the picture ever so slightly if it's backlit or it's a bit too dark for your liking. A white balance and high-speed shutter control. You can't manually adjust the shutter to a slower speed than which is automatically used for that particular situation. And some controls in reference to the date and time display, the memory display, as well as to reset the dummy counter, because of course this is an analog tape, so it doesn't record a digital counter to the videotape. The camcorder is responsible for keeping track of the position of the counter. You do have a push macro control and a self-timer button, so if you want to, I guess, get in the shot for some reason, you can just press this, and then I think it'll count down, I believe, up to 10 seconds before it'll begin recording. You've got this awkwardly placed cold shoe right here, which would make it very difficult, I would assume, to attach some sort of a shotgun microphone, at least so that it's evenly placed, because the mount would have to be all the way toward the back of the microphone, and it would end up banging into and rubbing against this handle. Thankfully, though, you don't really need the aid of an external microphone, because in addition to having a black and white viewfinder that you can slide in and out, this does have a little miniature shotgun condenser microphone as well, which amazingly still has the protective cardboard tube that it shipped with. And the foam is beginning to deteriorate ever so slightly. You could see some pieces on the top of the camera, but aside from that, it's in relatively pristine condition. There's just some area here where it looks to have dry rotted. But aside from that, the microphone is in great condition, and it connects to the camcorder along with the black and white viewfinder through the use of this DIN style connector, just like the video connector. Your zoom control is up here. You can use this for zooming in and out. This has, I believe, let's see, it's mentioned somewhere here on the camera, 12x optical power zoom with 55mm lens threads, and the lens itself on this camera is exceptionally large. Although it's not all that sensitive in low light, you can see it's actually surrounded by glass. I just noticed, I thought this was plastic, but the lens itself is glass, as is the assembly around it. And then it's got this strange area down here that I haven't a clue what purpose it serves, because this is a true viewfinder. It's not like it's a regular optical viewfinder where you're just looking out directly. You're monitoring what the actual lens sees, so I'm not really quite sure what this lens down here is for. Could be for something else. I'm not all too sure. You do have a tally light letting you know and others know that you're recording video proudly on a VHS monstrosity that still amazingly works to this day. And then you have this hand strap here, which is really quite comfortable. Even though it doesn't look to be too substantial, it actually quite is. Although it's kind of an awkward position because there's really no place for them to have put this hand strap elsewhere. But it's really quite awkward holding the camera with all the weight being centered toward the back of the camera, and it puts a lot of undue stress and strain on your hands, arms, and shoulder, because you're holding this camera up, all the weight's pulling back toward you, and you're holding it from the very front of the camera. So just after a few minutes of recording, your hands really start to ache, as do your shoulders and your arm, because you've got all this weight on there, and you're holding it from the very front of the camera, instead of more in a centered position, such as where this actual handle is. And you also do have a record button here. This is the only record button. I've seen some VHS camcorders where they put one up here conveniently, so if you're wanting to record by holding it using this handle, you can just press a button right over here, but there is no such thing on this camera because you just have eject and the power controls. And of course you have manual focus control. This does not have a focus ring on it, so this is what you would use. And of course this has full auto system capabilities with an LED indicator to remind you of such things. On the bottom of the camcorder there is a metal tripod mount and a locator pin. You can see the data plate here, manufactured by Sharp Corporation, Mahwah, New Jersey. Model number VL-L270U, 12 watts, 12 volts, made in Japan. I've since connected this up to AC power. We should now be able to connect this power adapter up to this camera's AC input, or rather a DC input, such as it may be, and hopefully get some sort of indication that this camcorder lives to record another day. So we'll turn this on. Okay, must have a loose connection. There we go. You can see the viewfinder moves away so that you can get a very, very miniaturized CRT display of what it's seeing on the lens. We have an indicator letting us know it's powered up, as well as a green LED that illuminates, letting us know that this has a full auto system, as previously alluded to. Well, you can get a general idea of what this camcorder sees and the kind of quality you'd expect to get from a camcorder of this era. It's actually not all that bad. I was expecting this to be a lot worse, probably because of all the bad experiences I've had with full-sized VHS camcorders of this age in the past. But this one, amazingly, works just fine. And it's now ejected the tape, and yes, it did come with a 20-minute workout tape from the thrift store, and I just went to the trouble of putting a piece of plastic over the Write Protect tab to record over it, because it's a free tape, might as well use it. And we can get a look at the components that make up the tape transport. Essentially, the similar design, layout, everything is pretty much on the same level of a traditional VCR. Of course, they tried to miniaturize things where they could, but there wasn't really much room for shrinking things. It is, of course, full-sized VHS. But thankfully, everything works. It has a nice, clean record head. All the tape transport path, guide wheels, and pinch rollers. Put this tape back in. Insert like so. It's winding the tape. And it's now begun to spin up. We get indication on the screen here that it's ready to record. Now, one thing I should probably point out as well is that you probably noticed that there is no playback button or any way to enter playback mode directly. And that is because you can see we're now in record mode. But once we lift this flap up, you can see close to camera record. So when we lift this flap up, the camera automatically switches over to playback mode. Now, since the majority of these camcorders are obviously not going to have their date and time settings correct or even working at that point because these watch batteries are probably dead, when you go ahead and power these cameras on for the first time, it's not going to have the correct date and time. I don't even believe it'll record it to the tape. And so how you go about setting the date and time is not something that is fairly straightforward, at least without the manual. You don't set it in camera mode. You have to open this flap up to enter playback mode. You can see there's a switch here that changes between camera mode and playback mode. And once this enters playback mode, how you go about setting the date and time is by simply pressing the date time display button. The date and time will begin to flash on the CRT screen, and then you can use the set and select buttons to adjust the time. So I use the select control to increase the value. So in this case, we'll set it to September the 9th. So I'll just leave that like so. And then once we're all done, press set one final time, and the date and time is now set. So now we can close this flap. Okay, this is a test of the Sharp VL-L270U. And I just noticed that this camera does not like to focus up close. I guess that's why they went to the trouble of putting a macro focus button on here, which you need to press, and then press the zoom out button, which then allows you to focus up close on items. You can actually get in pretty close. And how I'm doing this is by pushing the macro button while using the zoom control. It actually works pretty well. And how you exit the macro focus mode is by releasing the macro button and then pressing the zoom in control, and that seems to bring it back to where you can zoom back in. And this camcorder is really quite heavy compared to a modern day camcorder. It's quite clunky, very heavy. I'm just amazed that this protective cardboard tube was still on this camera all these years later. I'm not playing anything good on the radio right now, at least good enough to include in this video, so play a vinyl 45 here. But it does at least focus up closely when you use the manual focus control, which certainly cannot be said for a lot of other VHS camcorders of this era, where you had to be practically 3 feet away, the next room away, just to be able to get everything in the shot and to have it be in focus. And another thing I should probably point out is that this has a very bright red LED that illuminates when you're recording. So people do get a visual indication that you're recording, so hopefully, accordingly, they won't disturb you until they see that light's extinguished. Standing far away, it does pretty well with focusing, even if you're zoomed in relatively close. But it's not too sensitive in low light. This is a rather bright setting right now, and it's still complaining. It says light right up here on the visual, the viewfinder, and the image looks rather dark and pixelated. You can see I have this pointed at my miniature component system setup sort of thing going on over here. And this stupid CD player is having another fit. The only problem with this this CD changer is that every now and again you have to give it a slap on the side. And now it's not going to work, so I'm recording. The belts are failing on this thing, so every now and again it decides to have a little flight of fancy and it doesn't want to work properly, but it seems to be working now. At least we can play a CD, and I know that this camera's going to be terribly out of focus. Now I'll go ahead and demonstrate the backlight compensation gain up button. Yeah, it does make a slight difference, and it does lock in place so you don't have to constantly hold the button. We have auto and manual focus, so I'll try focusing this manually. So you can do some pretty interesting focus in and focus out effects like you would with a DSLR. So I'll switch that back to auto. And we have high speed shutter, which allows us to select 1/500, 1/1000, and full auto, so that's pretty much it. And then we have a white balance lock, so it just prevents it from automatically changing the white balance.